It's November 8, 2021. I'm Todd Dunn. Today I'm back in the boat shed and I wanted to show you the progress on the repairs to Tortuga's hull and the beginning of some of the work I'm doing on my 1973 Allied Princess Seaquestor. So let's take a look at Tortuga. It's kind of dark in here, but right in here is the forward repair that I did on Tortuga. It's centered right around that through hull fitting you can see, and it's all painted up. I've got the boot stripe repainted, although I may have not gotten it quite as straight as I could like because there's not a lot of room in here. There's another boat right here about a foot away. As we move back aft, here is the spot I repaired back here, and as you can see, that is all done. Now let's walk over to the other side of the boat. I'll show you something that I haven't shown you before. Right up here at the shear is the repair that I needed to do over here. I replaced about a foot of wood up there that was very punky when I pulled it out. And the only thing that remains to get this repair to the point where it just is painting is to put the trim back on. And that's one of the things I'm going to do today. So I'm going to get started. All right, here's the trim I took out. I initially thought the repair was going to be smaller than it turned out, so I cut this piece out. And then I cut a little bit more trim off just to be able to finish the repair up. The wood was so punky that when I took this piece of trim off, I was able to just pry it off, and the screw just pulled right out of the plank. So what I have to do on these pieces of trim before I put them back on is a little cleanup, scrape off that caulk, and get a little bit of excess wood off and get this screw out. I'm going to start by doing that. That won't take too long, and then we will scrape these off, and then I'll reinstall them with a little bit of epoxy putty on the joints and a caulking compound all along the top edge to keep water from going between the trim and the plank. So I don't think I'll show you knocking the screw out. It's pretty straightforward. I just take this bung out and then knock that screw out. And scraping this is just going to be going over it with a scraper, so pretty straightforward. But we will try to show putting it back on. It's really tight in there. I'm working in an 18-inch gap between the wall of the building and the boat, so it's really hard to set the camera up to show what I'm doing without me being between the camera and the work. So anyway, I'm going to get this ready and put it back on and show you the result. Okay, I don't know if that's going to be in focus. I'm pretty close to it. I've dry fit the trim and taped around it so that any fairing compound or caulk that I put in there is not going to ooze out onto the paint. So at this point, I'm ready to slather this wood up and screw it down and put some bungs in, and at that point we will be ready for trimming the bungs and repainting. Maybe a little bit more fairing depending on how well it sits in there. So time to get this last little bit of wood installed for this repair. Okay, I've now gotten the trim on. The screw holes are bunged, and there's lots of epoxy compound on there, two-part System 3 Quick Fair, which has a reasonable bonding, and it'll also provide a good seal between the hull and the trim, so I won't get any leaking behind it. And if I'm concerned about that, I'll open up the top seam with my oscillating saw and put a regular fairing compound in there. So there it is, all put on. Tomorrow I will trim the bungs sand off excess fairing compound, and depending on how it looks, I may put another coat of fairing compound on, or I may decide to paint it and get the first coat of paint on it, which will probably be the only coat for this fall. Okay, so that's where we are here on this repair. The hull is repaired, the trim is back on, and it is now just cosmetics. So what I'm going to do now is go up on a sailboat and show you the beginning of a project I'm working on over there. I'm now aboard my 1972 Allied Princess 36 Seaquestor, and the project here is to rebuild part of the cabin sole, basically the forward part in the V-berth. Show you what the cabin sole looks like in the rest of the boat. Don't know if it's going to show very well, but that is a cherry cabin sole with strips of white maple. And I installed that about 12, 13 years ago, and it is 3/4 inch thick, so you can sand it down once or twice. Up here in the V-berth area, we have condensation on the inside of the hull, and it ran down in and damaged not so much the cherry, but the substrate underneath it. And I had to rip it out. And so now I'm getting ready to rebuild it. I ripped it out last spring and just glued down this layer of marine plywood and as a substrate so that I could put down my 3/4 inch cherry on top of it. However, because of the cost of cherry and other reasons, I decided to go with thinner cherry. I'm going to go with a bit under 3/8 of an inch. And because of that, I have to build up the subsole, if you will, with a little bit more plywood. So that's what I'm here to do today, or at least start the process. I came in last week and I patterned this area by taking strips of wood and fitting them in there and hot gluing them together to make a couple of patterns. And then I went plywood shopping, and there's no marine grade plywood available in this part of Maine. And my normal supplier was completely out, and they haven't even reordered because their supplier is out. So marine grade plywood isn't an option. So I ended up buying some exterior grade sheathing, but boy, it's low quality compared to marine grade. It has voids and other things. So I'm going to have to do a little work on it. Anyway, I used the patterns I made to cut out 2 pieces of plywood to fill this gap up here. And today what I'm going to do is see if they fit. And if they don't, I'm going to sand and trim them until they do fit, which shouldn't take too long, although it will involve climbing on and off the boat with the plywood a couple of times probably. So that's what I'm going to do. And once I get the wood fit here, I'm going to use the same epoxy fairing compound that I just used over on Tortuga's trim to fill voids in the new exterior grade plywood sheathing that's going to now be the underlay for my cabin sole. And before I install it, which hopefully will happen tomorrow, I'm going to coat all the edges and the bottom with unthickened epoxy, and then we will glue it down with thickened epoxy. So let me grab the plywood and see how well it fits. There's the first piece, and I'm just going to slide it up and see how well it fits. And I can see it's off a little bit, so I'm going to have to get down there and have a look and see if I can figure out exactly where I need to trim it to make it fit better. It took 2 adjustments, but I got the new plywood to fit. I had to take about a 1/16 inch off the triangular piece up forward, off the aft end of it, and I had to trim its aft corners a little bit to get it to slide all the way up. But other than that, everything is set. So what I'm going to do now is take this plywood and use my epoxy compound to fill all the voids, which are mostly on the back. Anything on the front doesn't really matter, because when I glue the cherry and maple cabin sole down, it will be done with thickened epoxy, and that will fill any irregularities. And along this edge over here, I'm going to build that up once this is down with thickened epoxy, so that that edge is not exposed. So what I'll do now is I'm going to go and fill the voids, which are on the back of the plywood. And I think one right over there, that dark spot against the bulkhead, and get it ready to install, which I will do tomorrow. Now that these pieces of plywood fit, I've got them turned upside down, or this one, and you can see the quality issues with this plywood. As I said, I would very much have preferred to use marine plywood, but right now it simply isn't available. So we'll put a little epoxy fairing compound in these voids, and that will hopefully do the job. This stuff is actually setting up already. This won't take long. And this will definitely be cured out and ready to sand tomorrow afternoon, or midday when I get here, to get this done. Put that on a little thick. And I think epoxy is probably as good as whatever the wood might have been. I think actually I'm probably improving the quality of this plywood now by filling it out with this epoxy based fairing compound. There we go. So that side's pretty much done, and there wasn't anything on the other side. So let's go to this one. There's a void right over here. That's on the good side, so we'll fill that. And I think I may have to mix up a little bit more to finish this off. Okay, that's pretty much filled. And any other imperfections here won't be a factor. So we'll turn this over, keep that edge off the pickup truck back. And I don't have any real deep voids here. These are mostly just flaws, where there are some knots. But I'll put a little compound on them anyway, just enough to coat them. Okay, we're getting there. Not much to go. A little bit right there. just about done here. Scrape a little more off right here. Now that will cure out and be ready to install these two pieces tomorrow. So I'm happy with that. And when I go to install them tomorrow, I'm going to paint the edges with epoxy before I put them in. So that is that. Well, those are my boat projects for November 8, 2021. And tomorrow, the boat projects will be continuing on both of these projects, trimming the bungs and sanding out the fairing compound on the piece of trim I put on Tortuga, and installing the plywood subfloor on board Seaquestor so that I can start doing all the measurements to build the cherry and white maple cabin sole. Okay, thanks for watching. If you found it interesting and don't think I'm too crazy for doing things this way, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't, why don't you consider subscribing to my channel? You'll get lots more videos like this fall, until it gets too cold to work on the boats, that is. And we'll also be doing some Acadia National Park videos. And coming up very soon, I just bought a Raymarine Element S chart plotter to go on board the sailboat. And I'm going to be hooking that up to my lithium battery, which I took home, and doing a run through of its capabilities. So you can look forward to that. Thanks for watching.